All right, I think we are ready to go. This is my first ever X, formerly known as Twitter. I think that's the official name of this website now. Spaces, and I'm doing it with my guest, Phoenician Hunter. We've been mutuals on this website for quite some time, so I'm really happy to speak to him in person. Let's see if he's here. Phoenician Hunter, Mr. Hunter, can you hear me? You should be good to go.
Hello?
All right, good.
Oh,
There
you
you are.
got me.
Hello.
I was speaking to myself for a while there.
Sorry about that. Yeah, like I
That's okay.
said at the beginning, this is my first time hosting, so just getting the technical familiarities out of the way. How you doing?
Good. Thank you for this opportunity to have me on. This is my first spaces as well, so new territory for both of us.
All right, great. So before we dive into the main topics, I was just curious to know a little bit more about you. Obviously, I have an American accent, you have an Australian accent, but I think we have a mutual Italian connection. So would you mind telling me just a little bit about that? Obviously, don't divulge too much if you don't want to, but I'm just curious to know what's our Italian connection?
Yeah, of course, I don't mind. So I grew up in Australia with both my parents were immigrants from Italy.
Hmm.
So I pretty much grew up in an Italian household. So my first language at home was Italian. So growing up, with parents of immigrants, basically. And but as I got older, I never really felt that Australia was my home. It's a
Hmm.
strange thing to say, but I mean, I guess that's what a lot of immigrants feel today. They're forced to come to these countries, and the children of immigrants. You hear them often say that they don't feel part of that culture and that community, and that's right, you don't, um, because I, like them, I felt that I never belonged there. Um, so as I got older, I would travel to Italy often. So I would, almost every 2 years or every year, I would go to Italy and sometimes spend even a year there. So from about 20 onwards, I was living between the two nations, and my parents died when I was quite young or relatively young. So after that point, I sort of felt that I didn't really want to hang around there anymore, and it just didn't feel like home. So I made the decision um, in about 2015 that I wanted to go back to the land of my ancestors and where I felt at home, and I've been living here in Italy full permanently for about 6 years now. So yeah, that's my background.
That's fascinating. I didn't know that we had so much in common. That's
Right.
almost word for word the story of my life.
Oh, really? I'm
Yeah.
not familiar.
Well, in my case, I kind of got blown off course, though. I got like life took me on all sorts of different twists and turns, and I moved from Italy to Spain, and I've been in Spain for a much longer time than I expected.
Oh, oh,
But yeah, my father is Italian, so I don't have two Italian parents. I just have the one.
right.
And I was born in the United States, but had that same sort of feeling of not really belonging, or
Mhm.
not quite even uh, liking where
Yeah,
I lived, where I was growing up. Perhaps things would have been different had I lived in a nice lily white neighborhood in foresty upstate New York or something, or Northern California, you know. Um, but I'm not quite sure about that, because I just always had a sense of my Italian identity, and visits to Italy,
mm,
or if my father's side came to visit us, if my grandmother or my uncle and cousins, my aunt came to visit us, it became a very obvious, noticeable part of who I am.
yeah,
Um, and then obviously there are certain customs and ways of doing things, and And yes, even the food we eat, it does make a difference. I know, you know, the wide variety of restaurants and food and consume becomes a sort of, staple of leftist takes, liberal takes on immigration and its bountiful benefits. But at some point, these things actually do matter.
Yes, I believe they do. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when I would bring uh, Italian food that my grandmother had brought over or sent to us in a parcel to lunch at school. Everyone else is sort of eating Wonder Bread
Yeah.
sandwiches, and then I pull out, these Italian goodies, and everyone at the table is kind of looking at me like, "What is that? What are you
Italian
doing?"
salami and
Yeah,
prosciutto.
exactly, exactly. So, those kind of things marked my childhood and my experience growing up. And then at the same thing has happened to me when I was able to. I came of age, and I went back to Italy,
Mm,
and I lived there for some time, and then I just wanted to see more. I had a very voracious appetite to see more of Europe, and I went traveling around the continent, and I'm very glad I did because I got to see and experience it and the people
yep.
right before things got really bad. It was already starting to get bad. Just like millennials in general, we grew up in the '90s. We grew up before the internet and social
Yeah.
media and all those things, so we can still have not necessarily nostalgic, but like genuinely good memories of how life used to be before it kind of got commodified and falsified through social media and Instagram and things like that.
Yep.
And I
Yep.
feel the same with Europe. I got a chance to see it before um, it got disfigured by mass immigration, demographic change, and also I've noticed Americanization has gotten worse over
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Black Friday being a very recent
Oh,
example, because we just experienced it. It did not exist in Italy, in Spain, in France up until I think it exploded around COVID time.
yeah. I can't stand to see, English words in Italian culture. It
Mhm.
just really it grinds my gears. There's no need for it. Uh,
Yeah.
but America is globo homo, and it's exported. That's its culture that it exports to the rest of the world. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, for the time being,
Yeah.
we're swallowing it all. But I think
Well,
it's going to
and you'll know that, of course, you'll know that Italy has strong ties, for better or worse, with America, and
ties. You mean
contrary
it's
to what
occupied? You mean
yeah,
occupied?
yeah, it's occupied, but also contrary to what a lot of Americans think when they think of just Europeans in general. I think they just think of a snooty French waiter or a posh English snob, but Europeans, like Italians, are very fond of Americans,
Oh, they love
and
Americans.
yeah,
Absolutely love them.
and that's
Yep.
why you see all this English, in their language. They adopt these American words, and they use them when they have an Italian equivalent, but hey,
Mm,
it sounds cool to talk like an American,
mm.
because they like Americans.
Yeah, it's because they absorb all the American, culture and television, movies, film,
Mhm.
music, and all that. So, like I said, they
Yeah,
dominate. They dominate the world because English is the international language that dominates everything. And we'll probably talk about that in a moment about
yeah.
language. Um,
It's another thing that I've noticed, over the years now with, again, just the way things have changed with streaming services, with, 5G internet, with all these different apps. More Europeans are watching American productions. You have in the European home now, you have Disney Plus, you have Netflix, you have HBO, when that wasn't the norm a very
right.
short time ago.
Yeah. Things have moved very quickly in a short period of time, haven't they?
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
And so, one thing I like about your perspectives is that you're very honest. You will, as you say on your Substack, which also goes by the name Phoenician Hunter. I'll pull it up right here. Yeah, you say your tagline is unraveling the mysteries of the past. No topic is forbidden. No belief goes unchallenged. And so you don't pull any punches. If you see that someone or something, some institution is complicit in the let's be frank, the genocide of Europeans and the disfigurement of their way of life, and also in the extended European world, in the New World, you have no hesitation to put those complicit people or institutions in the crosshairs.
Yeah, I mean, I attack everyone basically, and I'm hated by everyone for it. So, when
Well,
you
not
go
not by
after
me.
everyone, you make a lot of enemies.
Yeah, but it's again, it's something that we have in common because we do have a lot of enemies, and sometimes people don't like to hear those enemies named.
Yeah,
And the United States might be one of those enemies, which we've been sort of chatting about that for
yeah,
a brief while. But the main topic we're going to talk about tonight is a perspective you have on the Catholic Church
mm,
and the other denominations of Christianity as well.
yeah,
Now, full disclosure, I have sort of long since given up on caring about the why. Why is mass migration happening? Why do the Jews want to do this or that? Why does BlackRock promote DEI policies and these woke films when they clearly are financial
right.
disasters, et cetera, et cetera? I say this because I only know that these things are happening and I just want to stop them, or, in my own pathetic, humble way that I
Okay,
can.
yeah,
But and also because there's multiple whys, um, and there's multiple whys depending on who you are talking about. So Jewish people might have a reason for supporting and backing mass migration and policies about mass migration. The business class will have a different why
that's
for
correct.
the same thing. And then the Christian community, the Christian churches, the Christian organizations will have a why that's different as well, but they're all still coalescing around the same thing,
Yes.
immigration. But you presented a why on the Christian question. Why are so many Christian organizations, the Catholic Church, the Protestant churches, the Lutheran churches, why are they the biggest movers and shakers in the immigration industry? You presented a why that I just found really compelling, and it kind of brought me back to appreciating the answer to the why question. So I'll just hand it over to you and let you talk a little bit about why. Well,
Yeah,
first present the facts, because there are going to be some deniers perhaps that will say no,
yeah.
and like I said, they don't want to hear this. They don't want to hear that the church is involved in this, but it is. So if you would like to first present some of the facts and then present your
Okay.
why they're doing this.
Yeah, I've actually prepared some notes because it's important that I read the facts and not, make errors as I do. But before I get into that, I just want to give a bit of background, um, because a lot of listeners may be unfamiliar with my who I am and my background in terms of my research. So you'll understand why this is important. I'll say it now and then you'll understand. So for me, it really began with looking into law, right? So specifically commercial, or better known as maritime law. Now, this led me to the study of etymology and the English language. And this is the point where everything was revealed to me. It's sort of like I broke out of the matrix and I could see the world in a different light. Okay. So other researchers have noticed that many words relating to nautical, sea, water, shipping, and navigation were common in the English language, but I could not find a sufficient explanation for their presence. So I went looking for one. And so I wanted to know why these words or spellings were used and how these words affect us, right? So you're probably not aware, but I wrote a book about it and about my
Hmm.
findings, and it's titled The Secret World of Words, where I explained that words are simply spells, right? That's why, we call them spellings in English. But the important part I discovered is that words and language are used to manipulate our very thoughts, ideas, and beliefs. Okay, so language, the way to look at language is simply the program. It's a program that we as humans run off, or it runs us. Okay, so further to this, I wanted to know who cast these spellings. You know, who are the wordsmiths that create our languages and our dictionaries? Because it's never really, you don't really, we don't know names, we don't know institutions. They just come to us. So what I found with that and the study of history, I found a consistent hidden hand present throughout history in all the major civilizations who acted as the real power behind these empires. So, this group have directed and manipulated human affairs since recorded time, right? And these are what I term the merchant priest class. And I'll show you that I believe it's the same power that is behind this immigration issue. This is why I'm bringing this up. Okay, so, and then that's when I got started on my Substack, because then I was just researching, documenting all my findings about this huge story about, human history and the human condition. So that's basically where, my research got started. Now, if you want me to address immigration, so if you look at the policies and funding for mass immigration, you will find that the vast majority is coming from Western nations themselves, especially the US. Okay, they're at the top of the list. Now, like I said, I prepared some figures that I want to go through. So, the largest donors for immigration initiatives includes the United States USAID with 1.4 billion, so by far the largest. Next is the European Union, 400 million. So, that's a difference of $1 billion. And then you got individual nations after that, like, Germany, the UK. And then you've got other nations too, like Japan, Saudi Arabia, Qatar. See, this is the thing that I found. It's Christian nations, it's Muslim nations, and it's Israel and Jewish organizations as well. And I'll get through them, okay? But the largest religious organizations include, so these are the largest. Catholic Charities USA is at the top of the list. Church World Service, which is a collaboration of Christian, Jewish, and Muslim organizations. So this is important. They're together. The three are together.
Mm-hmm.
Catholic Conference of Bishops, Migration and Refugee Services. Never heard of it, but again, they're the largest. And then after that, we've got the refugee agencies, which is the UN Refugee Agency, World Health Organization, International Organization for Migration. But what you got to understand is those agencies are largely funded by the US again. Okay. And then after that, you've got Jewish organizations, which is the biggest one is the Open Society Foundations, attributed to George Soros, who again was revealed recently is funded to a large extent by US aid. So, then under that, you've got Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society and the UN Refugee Agency Israel. But, apart from nation states, it is the Christian organizations that are the largest donors. So, yeah, that's what the figures, say.
Did you ever see that film Network? I think it's from 1974 or 1977 maybe.
I believe, but I don't recall. I don't remember it.
It's the film with a television news presenter kind of just, well, he literally gets, fed up with it all. And he even starts ending his shows by screaming, "I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore."
Oh, I saw clips of it. I don't think I saw the whole movie.
It was written by Paddy Chayefsky, who I believe was Jewish. But I think you would like this film because eventually this presenter, he becomes a sort of media personality, and he becomes beloved because he's the populist voice. He's speaking for the people. his catchphrase, "I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore," becomes the catchphrase of the entire nation, America, obviously.
Right.
And they're shouting it from the windows, and it's on T-shirts now. And there's a moment where he begins to think that he's like a prophet. And so what happens is, the studio head, I believe it is, after this television presenter starts to get a bit too cuckoo and it's starting to affect the ratings, the studio head has to find a way to sort of rein him in and make him popular again, make him, think straight again and present a good show. And he does this by bringing him into this grandiose auditorium and closing all the windows so it's just this darkness, and then a spotlight shines upon him so that he looks like God. And he even says, "I'm speaking to you as the voice of God." And anyway, the point that I'm getting to is that there's a moment where he tells this presenter, "You keep talking about Americans, America, and that you're the voice of the people, the voice of the nation." And he says, "There are no nations. There are no people. There is only IBM, ExxonMobil."
Ah,
He starts to list off a bunch of corporations that were important in the 70s.
yep.
And I think of this scene so often, especially when I hear things like you just said. you know, we think of countries, we think of nations, but behind the scenes, no one in power cares about these things.
No.
And recently it was revealed, after the EU sort of saber rattle at Elon Musk and find Elon Musk and X and all that. It turns out that pulling the strings, using EU laws as leverage to censor X or punish X, is a former member of the Biden administration, an American from the Biden administration, who's exiled off to, she's run away to Europe now to work within the European institutions, because there are no countries for these people. There are no nations. Um, and so when you list off all of those different charities and groups and open society funded
Mm,
by USAID, it just really hammers home the global network of these people who don't give a damn about nations and countries and
no.
and the different
Or
genuine
culture.
diverse identities of people.
No. Um, yeah. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, I found that nations are corporations anyway, and
Mm,
they started incorporating these nations in the 1800s. And some people have shown that they're all registered on the stock exchange, the stock market and they hold some certificates in America or something, in the American government. I think I saw one for Australia as an organized as a corporation. So they actually run nations like corporations. I mean, they don't give a damn about, and that's the way they manage them, because they don't really care about the traditions and cultures of the people. Um, because what I found, and I mentioned earlier, the merchant class, merchant priest class are the ones behind all this, and they've got a certain uh, perspective of the world and a vision that conflicts with what I would say, ours is, where we hold, a lot of, we hold our culture and tradition, as a quite an important, part of our lives. They don't see it that way, and I don't believe the church does either. And uh, it did at some point, but when like Christianity went global and started preaching to other nations, other races, uh, I think at that point it cared less about the European people and more about spreading their universal doctrine. Um,
absolutely.
yeah, but there was a point where they, there are people online, Christians, who say, "Oh no, Christianity is European," and they're right to an extent. At some point, it was, but maybe it was
Mhm.
just to further their own interests rather than, you
Mm.
know, the people's interests. And
I've often seen it said, and I'm sure you've seen it as well. It's stated that the West betrayed Christianity. The West abandoned Christianity, and
No,
that's why we're having all these problems. And
it's
I've
the other way
actually
around.
often been putting it the other way around. Yeah. No,
It
no, the Christianity kind of gave up, betrayed the West. It betrayed Westerners, as you said, to focus more on the 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 huge swathes of new converts,
yeah,
potential converts in these new continents.
but that's not working for them, and that's what I would like to address next, which is
Mhm,
the declining Christianity. So, and no matter what these online Christian, crusaders or influence try to tell you, the fact remains that, Christianity of all denominations is dying and has been for close to a century. And,
mhm.
I've gone and looked at figures from 100 years ago, and it doesn't paint a pretty picture. So, again, I've prepared some stats for our chat, and I'll go through them here. So, these figures I've taken from PEW Research Center. I think it's called Pew Research Center, on Christianity, and in Europe, so it dropped 8.8% from 2010 to 2020. So that's just in 10 years. It's almost dropped 9% and stands at 67% of the population. Um, I mean, and I think it's even less than that because, if you're doing a survey and they say are you a Christian, you probably say yes because, that's that's the religion of your parents or your ancestors. So you just say yes, but you're probably not a practicing Christian. You don't go to church, for instance. So um, in North America, it dropped 10.8% in that same period from 2010 to
Wow,
2000.
it dropped
Yeah,
more in the United States?
yeah, so almost
Wow.
11% to 62.9% of the population. And I believe now it's even less than that because the latest figures I saw, it was I think 59%. So you need to remember though, as recently as the early 1990s, it stood at 90%.
Mhm,
So that is almost, 30% decline in 20 years.
mhm. I'm just astonished because we often hear that, and this is like sort of a cope that you might hear from American conservatives that, America will save itself in some way sooner or later because at least we still have religious convictions. At least we still have belief in God, unlike those Euro poors who have all become atheists and socialists.
Yeah.
But actually, again, so we see again that that's not the case, and
No,
reality is painting a different picture.
yeah, they're just a loud minority that are,
Mm,
screaming as their illusion collapses before them. And I got one from Australia. It dropped 20.4% in that same period, in that
mhm,
10-year period. So, and stands at 46.8% of the population.
yeah.
So,
And I would just like to add as
yeah,
an anecdote, as we hear about statistics, but I think you're right, also about if someone were to ask, a European or an American or a Canadian, Australian, "Are you a Christian?" Perhaps, many, if not the majority of the responses would be affirmative just because, yeah, you live
yeah,
in a Christian country and you
that's
have,
right.
embraced Christian values. But as a personal anecdote to go with these statistics, I will attest to the fact that the churches in Europe, the churches in Italy, the churches in Spain, if they aren't mostly empty, they're populated by the elderly.
Yeah, they're
It's
empty.
very rare to see young people. I can think maybe apart from, for example, Acción Católica is a group that's active in Spain, and they try to have youth retreats and functions for the youth and mass for the youth
Mm,
and barbecues and things like that. So I've seen, and Spain is a very performatively Catholic country. They have very in
mm,
Semana Santa, Holy Week during Easter
mhm,
week, they have these huge, especially in the south, processions and it's all very emotive. But the thing is, for the rest of the year that isn't Holy Week, these people who are being so effusively Christian and proudly Catholic, they haven't stepped foot in a church
no,
the entire rest of the year. And so I can attest to that just personally by the things I've observed. And it's no different in Italy. It's the same thing.
yeah,
I have a very devout Italian Catholic uncle who has been bemoaning everything that you've been saying. He's been lamenting it all my life. You know, the emptiness of the churches, the children, the youth are not coming to church.
Yeah.
So it's not just statistics. It's not just cold, hard numbers. I can even add some personal anecdotes to attest to that. It is a true reality.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, some Christians say they point to figures where Christianity has increased, you know, in some nations, but that's only happening in you know, non-white nations like Africa, for example.
Mhm.
But in the West, it's been declining for decades. And you know, I'll get into why, and there's a logical explanation for it.
Yeah, and this
Now,
is, like I said at the beginning, this is the compelling why. This is
uh,
the reason why I went back to actually having a sort of, this is a, because like I said, I really don't care about the whys anymore, but when you presented this perspective on it, I I did have a bit of a tingle in my mind again. It's like, "Oh, that's a really interesting," because it is bizarre when you see,
yeah,
Christians like Pope Leo is no different than Pope Francis, and
no,
he's been promoting the
yes,
immigration message and welcome everyone and bring them in and don't be a racist, you know. And we have to be careful about you know, nationalist sentiments rising. And you think, well, this is why would the head of the Catholic Church
yeah,
be okay with this? And clearly he must know that this is bad for Christians and it's bad for the European Catholics. But then you presented a why, and I just thought it really, you know, left me
yeah.
gobsmacked. So go ahead.
Yeah, when I found that, I had the same reaction. And so, you know, my question was, why would Christian organizations want, you know, non-Christians like Muslims or Hindus in their nations when, you know, clearly their faith is declining, right? And also Islam is growing every year. So if you look at the stats for Islam, they're growing. And, you know, Muslims aren't converting to Christianity when they come to these nations, right? So they're not gaining any new members. So, you know, you got to ask why. And like you said, why do the popes, you know, you know, continually say that, you know, we need to accept these immigrants, and you know, when you look at it, you know, why would a dying institution speed up their own demise? So, you know, it's like they're committing suicide. So what I found, and I need to give some background here, because the reason this isn't obvious to a lot of people is because the truth about Christianity has been hidden. Okay. So the history of Christianity is a lie. When you know the facts, then it all fits into place and it all makes sense. Okay. So um, the other thing is that people, you know, might say, Christians might say, oh, you know, the Pope is doing that because, you know, Christianity represents the word of God and love and peace and tolerance and all that crap, you know, that they, you know, that they've sort of
Mhm,
only projected in the last century or so. I mean,
mhm,
really, anyone who knows history knows that that is just, you know, recent bullshit. Okay, so the truth is that Christianity was born out of violence and conflict, right? It
mhm,
was developed through financial instruments, and it was upheld by the sword. There's no other way to say it. That's the history of Christianity. Let's also not forget that the Catholic Church had a standing army until as recently as 1870.
hmm,
So that's only 150 years ago, right? They had their own army. That's not a peace loving organization, okay? Um, so I'll just, you know, briefly, I'll just give some background here. So Christianity, to what I found in my research, was born out of the old Roman pagan state religion.
mhm,
Right? Its institutions laid the foundation for Western civilization. They weren't Christian, they were Roman. You know how you hear a lot of these Christians say, oh, Christianity, you know, created Western civilization, right?
mhm,
No, no, it was Roman. What happened was Christianity is nothing more than the Roman state religion rebranded. Okay. So they just rebranded it. And this was once known as the worship of Caesar Augustus. That's what it was known as. That's what Christianity was known as before it was known as, you know, Christianity. But that, like I said, that's been hidden. That's been hidden and wiped off the record. Now, this also goes for the Protestant and evangelical retarded shoot-offs, uh, which because they say, oh yeah, no, a lot of them agree with what I say, and they said, yeah, that's the Vatican, that's Babylon the Great or some bullshit like that they call it,
Mhm.
and they think that the Catholic version of it is not their version. It's sort of like this fake pagan version, but
Oh, yeah. They will
yeah,
openly say that
yeah,
Catholics
they
are
openly say
pagans.
that, but they think theirs is different. No, yours came out of there. Yours
Mhm.
is an offshoot of that. And what I'll explain what Protestant and evangelical the shoot up where it came from. It was simply a scheme by the Venetian oligarchy to split Christianity and break the power of the Roman Church in Europe. Because at the time, Venice was at war with Rome. So I've documented all this stuff. I've got close to 60 articles on my Substack, and I've recorded, I've documented the whole history of Christianity, even Judaism, Islam, the collapse of the Roman Empire, how it morphed into Christianity. It's too much to go into here, but
Mhm.
I've done all the background on it. So yeah, further to this, the most important fact, though, is that Christianity as we know it is not ancient. This is the important part that I found. It's not ancient like they say. And you hear all these crusaders, oh, 2,000 years of, we've been around 2,000 years. No, that's
Mhm.
bullshit. No institution has lasted that long. And now in the last, you know, a century, it's dying. It's bullshit. It hasn't been around that long. Okay. And it arose from the Crusades at the end of the Crusades. So at the end of the 13th century is when it rose. But its literature first appears. Now, this took me by surprise. It first appears with the invention of the printing press. So we're talking about the late 1400s, closer to the 1500s. Okay, that's when it appears. It's
Mhm.
almost like the printing press was invented almost to thrust this doctrine, this New Testament, which was going to be the new program for the minds of the Western people. Okay, that's what it was. It was a program. And I also found in my research that Judaism isn't ancient either. Okay,
Mhm.
it's
That's
only
another fascinating detail.
yeah, it's
Mhm.
like only 200 years before Christianity.
Mhm.
But this is going to throw a lot of people, into a headspin. Islam is the older of the Abrahamic religions. Okay, so and Islam is just a copy of the Persian religions. Okay, so it came from there. They've just modified it. And Islam today isn't what it was when it first came on the scene. That's the same for Christianity as well. It's changed over the centuries. You know, religions don't stay static. They evolve, they change. It's all, like all institutions do, They
Mhm.
right.
And
So
that's Christianity in particular. I can't really
yeah,
speak for Islam or Judaism,
yeah.
but that's in a way, it has been Christianity's strength that it does adapt to whichever environment it's presented, it's introduced. It does, as you said, in the European context, the Catholic Church just co-opted or appropriated Roman festivals, pagan festivals,
Yes,
rebranded them. We're about to approach one in Christmas itself.
I know.
They just rebrand them and they say, look, this festival that used to be for Sol Invictus, now it's just going to be about baby Jesus. But you can do all the same things. Just go to church instead of temple, and it's about this Messiah. It's not Sol Invictus anymore, but it's going to be on the same day. Nothing else changes. Don't worry. And in that way, the masses are sort of like they just shrug their shoulders and go, all right. It's very
Well,
similar to how any other
yeah.
culture changes. Look at it's not a favorable comparison. I'm sure Catholics will bristle and Christians will bristle at this, but look at the way woke moved through our society and our culture to a place of such dominance in the past few years. These things do happen. So you have these mimetic viruses, that, if you will, that spread, and Christianity was very good at the Christian
Yeah.
missionaries, the heads of the church were very good. Look at the Celtic cross. It's so typical in Ireland, how it incorporated the the customs and the aesthetics of that faraway Atlantic island, you know, and it has, and Christianity there has a very different look just in the appearance of its crosses, as
Yeah.
one example.
Yeah, I've just written an article on that about the Druids and how Christianity pretty much had borrowed everything from the Druidic religion.
Mm,
And yeah, you're right. They just took these existing rituals and ceremonies and dates and just rebranded them. Caesar Augustus was known as the savior. He was also known as the son of God.
mm.
You know, when you look at this stuff, nothing has changed. It's just they've changed the names.
Mhm,
Okay. Now, I don't think it was a bad thing. See, this is the thing. I don't attack Christianity. I don't think it was bad. What they wanted to do was to unify. See, the Roman Empire was a vast empire, and it held many different peoples and cultures and races under one umbrella. So they had to, administer all these people. And they all had different religions and faiths. All they wanted to do was unify it under one, organization. They saw the power and the strength of Islam doing that. They saw, the Jews doing the same, and they
mhm,
thought, we should do this. We should do something similar. Basically, it was to unify the people, and there's nothing really wrong with that.
mhm,
Okay, so I don't look at it as evil, and if you look at see the problem with Christianity today is people have taken the doctrine literally, and that happened with the Protestant Reformation. I,
mhm,
I believe that really degraded the message in what Christianity was originally meant to be. And I found is, okay, so every religion has what they call public worship and then a hidden worship. Okay, so or an alchemical or a hermetic side to it.
yeah,
This is the case with Islam. It's the case with Judaism, and it's the case with Christianity. So the public worship is for the layman. They're the ones who take it literally, and they're the ones who will. There was a person called Jesus, Son of God, and all that, and they believe it that these people, these characters, these places actually existed, right? But there's another way to look at it, and that they're missing a huge, huge part of it. They're actually missing the truth of the doctrines. There is truth in them, but they're not reading it correctly. So, I mean, that's a huge topic in itself, and probably we won't go into that here. But I just want to say, yeah, I don't think it's an evil thing. I don't think it's a bad thing.
mhm,
It can be used as a weapon, and it has been. And it's been turned against us at the moment. Um, the European people.
mhm.
Mm.
So, so tell us, let's
You,
get back to
yeah.
that why then. So Christianity is declining.
Yep.
It spread all over the world, but
Yep.
it really, you know, it spread after this arduous process of the Crusades. You know,
Yes.
birthed through the sword, birthed through struggle and threat, and now it's in this decline, and we see what, and this is the great conundrum. It's like, why was this is this religious institution which used to vigorously go off to all parts of the world and conquer enemies and convert them forcibly, why is it now so weak and cut?
Mm,
And so
mm.
uh, tell us what your
Yep.
view on the why this is happening. Why is the church and these other denominations, why are they all doing this?
Okay. First of all, I think most of their followers were like you said, they were following the same things anyway. So they were pagan and they were following the same rituals, the same festivals. So it wasn't difficult for them to sort of move across, right, to this new Roman religion because it didn't ask anything different of them, right? the other thing that is not spoken about is a lot of these kingdoms and nations converted to Christianity for economic reasons. This is what I believe happened to the Norse, the Viking. What they wanted to do is they wanted to trade. So they wanted to trade with the rest of Europe. When Christianity became the religion of Europe, it locked out any other nations who weren't Christian. So if you're pagan, you weren't allowed to trade. So they said, if you want to trade with us, if you want to access our markets, you need to convert to Christianity. So the king, he didn't really care. He just said, yeah, okay, as long as I got access to these markets, I can become rich, make money. I'll be whatever you want me to be. So that's how a lot of Europe was converted. It's something that's not really spoken about. I just wanted to say that. So I'll get back onto what I believe the root cause of this mass immigration is about. So what I found is during the mid to late 1800s, a lot of the old literature from the East, especially Persian and Indian texts, were being translated and becoming accessible to Westerners for the first time, right? So this is when honest researchers and historians were coming to the realization, like I said, that Christianity was a fusion of ideas and myths borrowed from older Eastern religions, okay? And this resulted in, like many books being published at that time about the true origins of Christianity. And that's where I get most of my, research from, 1800s. So one of these scholars to question the origins of Christianity was the English historian Edwin Johnson. And he wrote in the late 1800s, and he also predicted that he could not see the church holding its power and influence for much longer. So he predicted this 100 years ago, right? And, going by the figures that we mentioned earlier, his assumption proved to be correct. So at the very end of one of his books called The Rise of Christendom, published in 1890, he makes the following observation, and I've prepared the quote. Okay, so for surely no clear-sighted churchman can expect that the church will regain her old power and prestige unless the conditions of her rise were to reoccur. So what were these conditions of her rise? We've mentioned them. There were the Crusades. So Johnson continues, were the European states to exhaust one another in civil war, were the Orientals, which he means Muslims, again to rush in upon us, the organization of the church might enable her to triumph again amidst the ruins of our culture. Now, does this not sound like the current conditions
It's
that
just
they're
it's
creating in the West?
it's eerie how close.
It's eerie.
Yeah.
So what they've done is, they're trying to recreate, the conditions of their rise. It was born out of conflict. So,
And now, again, just like with the
yeah,
statistics, just to provide some observational anecdotes, things that I've observed
yeah,
that back this up. We've seen this happen in front of our eyes of late.
yeah.
If you look at the infotainment sphere, if you look at the podcaster sphere, the influencer sphere, you have some really important people bigging
Yes,
up Christianity lately.
you
Jordan
see it
Peterson,
everywhere.
for example, was one who's not a believer. At least he can't bring himself to say it because he isn't. But he's been prescribing, like a doctor, he's been prescribing Christianity as the solution. So even though he's not a believer, but he says, how
Yes,
can we save the West? How can a young man improve his life? Well, we got to go back to Christianity.
yes,
But then it's not just Jordan Peterson. Then you see people like Joe Rogan on his number one
yes,
most watched, most downloaded podcast, interview show in the world. You know what I think, man? I think we got to go back to Jesus Christ. Maybe this
yes,
Christianity stuff is right after all. Russell Brand converts to Christianity, and now
yes.
he's like this
Public
evangelical pastor,
conversions.
and I think he was just at a big political mm, shindig or something, and he was there, saying that all this Christian stuff. We got to go back, and of course, obviously, in American conservative movements, paying lip service to Christianity is something that opportunists have done for a long time.
Yeah.
Donald Trump is an example, just say a few things about Jesus and God and take some photos in a church holding the Bible, you'll get votes, you'll get applause
Yeah.
at your speeches.
Votes and yeah.
But there seems to also be, like, some genuine true believers and true converts, and of course, converts are always the most zealous.
Yep.
So we are seeing that it's not just, you know, normie conservatives who are gonna feel like this way anyway, that, "Oh, we need to go back to God, we need to go back to church." Another person who says you need to go back to church, Ben Shapiro, that's interesting, a Jew telling the Gentiles, "Go back to church."
Well, there's a
Um,
reason. Yeah.
yeah, I know, but it's just to back up this idea that through the mess they're making with these immigration policies and these diversity policies and opening the gates to the enemies of Christianity, the historic enemies of Christianity, is actually a way in which the church will, as Edwin Johnson says, regain its former power.
Glory. Yeah. Power. Um, See, when I noticed all these influencers converting publicly, right, to Christianity, like Milo,
Oh,
um,
right, that's another one, yeah. Milo,
Russell Brand, yeah,
yeah.
all these ones, right? They're not. It's not authentic. Listen, if you're going to convert to, keep it to yourself. Like, why does it need to be broadcasted? I don't understand that.
Mm,
Like, if it's really genuine, you don't need to tell anyone. It doesn't need to be part of your identity. See, this is the thing. These are paid. Nick Fuentes is another one. Now,
mhm,
you're going to hear a lot of him in the next. He's got a major part to play in all this. When I noticed all these, you know, influencers becoming Christians, that's when I knew I was that this theory was correct.
mhm,
And the other thing that made me believe it was correct is that Islam is always portrayed as the enemy. So even though there are, you know, millions upon millions of Indians migrating to Western nations as well, even more than Muslims,
mhm,
they've never portrayed as the enemy. You see, it's always Muslims.
mhm.
Okay, so Islam needs to be the enemy in this setup, right? Um, it, and the Jews are sort of playing the role of in between. They're trying to align with wherever benefits, whichever benefits their cause, and they've done that throughout
Yeah,
history. Okay,
nothing's changed since the ninth century in Iberia.
right, exactly. Whose side were they on in Spain, and then whose side? Then they went to the Ottoman Empire. They were on the.
Mhm,
Do you know what I mean? They play both sides.
mhm,
See, this is the thing. This religious conflict not only benefits Christianity, but it also strengthens Islam and Judaism in the long run. That's why they're all funding it.
mhm.
Because what happens in times of fear? What do people do? They stick together,
Yeah.
and they identify the enemies by what? Either their race or their faith.
Mhm.
So
Just as
all
another side anecdote, that Jewish rabbis, I guess
mm,
that's redundant. Rabbis acknowledge this, and Jewish scholars acknowledge this, and there's a plurality of them who have openly acknowledged that anti-Semitism, as awful as it might be to have to endure it and live surrounded by all these anti-Semites, but they've acknowledged that anti-Semitism has actually served a very good purpose for the Jews. It's kept them united. It's kept
yeah,
them with strong roots, a strong in-group preference, maintaining their identity and their traditions, the things that make them Jews, and it's kept them strong because, like iron being beaten into a sword, it needs that friction,
yeah,
or
and
like a
it
muscle
brings
needs to be worked out to get stronger. And so if the Jews are under threat from anti-Semitism, well, it's actually in a way good for them because without
yep,
it, they integrate too much and they adopt too much of their host nation's customs and traditions, and they lose their own, which make them Jews.
yep,
So obviously,
and it brings them
this
back.
would work with Christians as well. How do you
Yep,
make Christians feel uh, strong again, like that muscle being worked out, like that iron being forged into a sword? How do you make Christians come together? Well, you kind of need friction, and we're seeing it. And there's another example. I just wanted to it briefly escaped me, but I wrote about this in an article of my own, about how this Christian diversion or detour is sort of becoming the main road of what used to be a nationalist identitarian movement, because it's also now creeping up in Europe as well. It's not just American conservatives, Republicans, TPUSA types. And in the thing that I wrote, I give mention to a Spanish journalist who's now based in Brussels. His name is Javier Villamor. He's on X, and he had shared an anecdote. As now he's based in Brussels and he's writing from Brussels and he's reporting on the EU.
Right.
And one day he's wandering around Brussels and he decides to enter a church. And he is, for all intents and purposes, from what he says of himself, he is a practicing Catholic. So he goes into a church and he realizes that the church is sparsely populated, sparsely occupied,
Mm.
and there's very few Europeans. There's very few. Obviously, Brussels is a modern, cosmopolitan, diverse city. So I think even the native European population of Brussels is the minority. But in any event, he notices that there's a few, white faces, and they're elderly, and they're sitting in the back. But the rest of the church, the rest of the attendees of the service, sitting in the front row with beaming faces, are Africans,
Yeah.
African migrants. And he says, I had an epiphany this day entering this church, filled with the Holy Spirit and its blessings and goodwill and joy. I realized that we can make diverse Europe work if we unite under the cross. And he's
Yeah.
on the right. He's an anti-globalist,
That's
supposedly Spanish
it's just
nationalist.
desperation. It's just desperation.
Yeah.
It because they don't see a way out. That's all. I mean, see, Christianity represents the element for these people that can unite all the nations for a common cause. It's the only institution that is present in all nations,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And even the different denominations, they can unite.
Oh, sure.
They can unite for a common cause, and this would be a common cause, right? And then they can go back to hating each other afterwards, right?
Christians and
But
Protestants united at
yeah,
the Siege of
yeah,
Vienna. They fought together against the Turks.
yes, exactly. So
Mm-hmm.
that it can be done. So if a Christian leader like the Pope, for instance, maybe we cannot see it right now, but maybe the next Pope can come out and say, we need to defend Christianity, our nations, our culture. We need to defend Western civilization. White people, even non-Christians, will rally to that cry, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because especially if their own governments are not presenting a solution, because they're desperate. They're going to be desperate, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it represents the only way, to get your nations back. So, they will tolerate Christianity as long as they get to live amongst their own people
Yeah.
once again.
Or even
So,
just to even rein in the excesses of liberalism or
Hmm.
leftism, which sometimes are distinguished. I think even Richard Dawkins, who was one of the members of the atheist movement, one of the prominent members of the new atheism
Yeah.
movement, didn't even he recently say, maybe we went too far in turning away from Christianity and attacking
Yeah, he
Christianity.
said something like that. He said it was good, and yeah.
Yeah,
But
that maybe
I
like
mean,
maybe there are some good things in Christianity that maybe we shouldn't have
yeah.
overlooked so flippantly, something like that.
I mean, I agree with him. Look, people need religion.
Mhm,
That's why civilization have always had religion.
mhm.
And like I said, they've had two doctrines. They've got, the outer doctrine for the layman, and they've got the inner doctrine. It's not that we do need it. Well, I personally don't, because I look at it, in a different way.
Mhm.
But most people do need it in their life. They need that sense of
Well, I've said
belief.
on many I've been very open about it that for me, this was the hardest red pill to swallow,
Yeah.
acknowledging the CQ, because I grew up in a religious home, and like I said, I have a very devout Catholic uncle.
What's CQ? What's the CQ?
The
Christian.
Christian question.
What's
If there's the
okay.
JQ, there's the next step
Yeah, I know
is the CQ. But when when you realize some things, it's like, oh, okay, well, now I feel a bit confused and I feel a bit empty. And now, for example, Christmas, well, it's no longer that special anymore. It's kind of lost its meaning and romanticism when you kind of know the history. And then also, current behavior of Christians and the Christian institutions is leaving a very bad taste in the mouth. Now, one thing I wanted to ask, one thing that I don't understand and
Yep.
it might, rather than back up this theory, it might challenge it.
Yep.
Because I do think it's a compelling theory, a compelling why, or at least an answer to the why. But a question that I have is then, if the ultimate objective and the reason why these Christian institutions and organizations and figures, powerful figures, leadership figures, are willingly participating in this uh, immigration experiment, if you want to call it that, terrible experiment. If they're opening the gates to Christian nations, knowing that women and children are going to be attacked and raped, men are going to be, stabbed in the neck for getting into a traffic argument by these savages that we're letting into our countries. Why then does Pope Leo recently say something, for example, like, don't think that Christians need to fear Muslims. We can all get along. Or Pope Francis participated in this thing a few years ago, obviously when he was still alive. It was like an ecumenical, very globalist summit the objective of which was to strengthen the ties, the interfaith ties between Islam, Christianity, Judaism.
Mm.
So if the idea is to put us in a state of conflict or under threat so that we turn back to the church, why would they also then say, no, no, let's do it peacefully and we'll all get along and sort of like sing kumbaya like good liberals, like hippies?
Well, it's not bad enough yet. They haven't. I mean, even though there's a lot of immigrants in Western nations, I mean, what's the ratio? I mean, 70% native to 30%. Some places it's 60-40. I think it needs to get 50-50 before they begin to um, you know, turn around and say, okay, we need to send them back. So the church and these organizations are still going to be pushing it for quite a while yet.
Mm.
And not at the end. It's not, we haven't reached that critical point yet. Okay.
That's
Because
chilling to
yeah,
think, but, when you think about all the suffering and all the horror
scary.
stories, I've
It's
seen the
scary, but you can't have a conflict if you've got 70% of the native population.
yeah,
It's not going to be a conflict then, is it? You're going to easily overwhelm them.
mhm,
Um, but look, there's another side to all this that I wanted to bring to the conversation, and it was
yeah,
another way of looking at this whole situation. Um, okay, so which might have a positive ending to this situation, dire situation we find ourselves in. And I actually recently recorded a podcast where I'll go through this in detail, and I'll just repeat it briefly here. Um, okay, I don't know your thoughts on spirituality or metaphysics, for want of a better term, but I personally think that there's something more to this physical material state that we inhabit.
sure,
Um, yeah. So, some call this God or, the universal mind, or like I said, metaphysics. Um, this unseen mechanism or force, I believe, has always directed human behavior. Okay. Now, the hidden or occult forces or magicians on this planet that, that make up the mystery schools that, we know of, the Freemasons or so many other fraternities. Why they are hidden is because they're aware of this fact and they know how to use this force to their advantage. Okay. So, what we see and experience in the world is often a result of their manipulation or tinkering of this unseen element. And what we are currently going through, right, especially since, the COVID ritual, which is what it was an alchemical process, okay, for want of a better term. This is what we're going through. And this whole immigration thing is an alchemical process. Or like, see, I think COVID was an initiation ritual, right, on a global scale.
Mm-hmm.
So public events like the JFK shooting, 9/11,
Mm-hmm.
the Twin Towers, and the recent Charlie Kirk assassination.
Mm-hmm.
These are things that always happen out in the open, right? In the public view, they're occult rituals. And the reason they're done that way is because they have an effect on the human psyche. That's what they're trying to tinker with. This is what's happening with this immigration thing. Now, the traditional meaning for an alchemical process or procedure is transforming base metals into gold, which they call transmutation, in order to find what they call the philosopher's stone, which leads to um, immortality or achieving spiritual perfection. But in reality, it's not about transforming physical metals into gold, but rather the mind into another state. That's what it really is about. And it's about transforming your mind to a higher level of evolution. Okay. So we need to remember that the language of these people, of the mysteries, of these people, this hidden hand is not, you know, it's not words and language the way we use it. Their language is symbolism. Okay. And so what they're talking about here is not physical metals. They're talking about the state of our mind and being. To reach immortality or another state, you need to go through transformation. And that's what we're going through now. Now, this is always a difficult and painful process. Okay. And I won't go through the process here, but it starts with the blackening, and then it turns to white, the whitening, and then it goes to gold and then to red. They're the processes. So this is what these magicians, or I call them the priest class, are doing on a global scale. And I hear the words, the terms white genocide or anti-white or the browning of America.
Mm-hmm.
This black, this white, this black. This is an alchemical process. This is what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the black and white process. This is an unseen, side to the physical manifestation that we're experiencing. So first it starts in the ether, and then it manifests in the physical.
Yeah.
All right. So that's what we're going.
Hyperstition, right?
Sorry.
Hyperstition is like when you, yeah,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
it's almost like the ability to now it's typical for like wine aunts to say about manifesting. I'm manifesting or projecting out to the universe,
Yes.
but who was
Oh,
the Englishman? He's very Nick Land, I think it was, right, who coined the term hyperstition for basically it's something that this priestly class you're talking about has done very well for quite some time. They sort of
for
will
some time.
things into existence.
Well, we can all do it. I mean, your environment is a creation of your thoughts, your thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I know it is because I've tried it and I exercise it.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to
They do
ask
that.
you. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Continue. Sorry.
No, they do that on a global scale.
Yeah.
That's all. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you because I can't resist a bit of esoterica myself, to be
Oh,
honest.
good.
But I wanted to ask you then, and it ties into this notion of intentionally taking us towards conflict on a
Yes.
massive scale, transformative scale.
Yes.
Is this something to do with ushering in the age of Aquarius, whose
Yes.
symbol is the water barrier, who kind of washes away all things? Because I've seen it argued and presented that World War II was the bookend to the age of Pisces, which was mostly characterized by
Yes.
man's attempt to connect with the divine. That's why it's the age of religion becoming so important, the age of Christianity and Islam and Judaism rising to such prominence. But even though it was an age characterized by man's attempt to connect with the divine and understand divinity, it was full of bloodshed, and its bookend, the signal, the signpost for the end of this age, was the worst war we've ever seen.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so,
And
is the age of Aquarius meant to be sort of this thing as well, where the initiation will be strife, and then we'll figure things out. We'll reach a new plane of consciousness and understanding, and then more or less things will calm down.
yeah, because change is always difficult. And we need to remember that Aquarius is an air sign, not a water sign. And I believe we entered the age of Aquarius when we started noticing air sign based inventions, sort of like the aeroplane, the telephone, all these air based, inventions and creations. So that's when I believe we came into it.
Hmm.
Um, and see, I mean, transition really is ultimately about, death and rebirth.
Hmm.
That's what it is. Okay. So, from one state to another. So, death, rebirth. This is why, that theme, death and rebirth, the phoenix rises
Hmm.
out of the ashes and all that. I mean, that's as old as time, and it runs through all the old religions and secret mysteries. I mean, Jesus just been a very recent example of
Yep.
that
Yep.
same reoccurring theme. It's not original. This upsets a lot of people. I keep telling them that it's not original. Doesn't mean it's not true in the sense that it's something that's valuable and there's truth in it, but it's not a person. They're not talking about a person. They're talking about a state.
Hmm.
They're talking about a state of mind that you need to enter and experience. And yeah, I think there's going to be conflict, and unfortunately, and I think a lot of people are not going to make it through. And the hardest thing is people are going to conflict with themselves, because one of the things about Aquarius is about revelation and destroying old ways and old beliefs and old, if you're holding on to the old ways, if you're holding on to your old beliefs, and you're not willing to maybe change, you're not going to make it through. You're not going to make it through. And a lot of people will probably take their own lives rather than being killed in any kind of conflict. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult for a lot of people.
I sense a, a sentiment of almost inevitability about this. So let's turn briefly away from the esoteric and to the practical.
Okay.
What do we do then? Those of us who value our nations, those of us like myself, I'll admit it, who think of ourselves as identitarians, who care about, as we spoke about at the beginning, uh, our Italian traditions, our Italian roots, our Italian relatives and family, and that blood that flows in our veins, our Italian homeland that we came back
Yeah.
to. For those of us who care about these things, that from what we're saying it seems unavoidable that they're going to be transformed, that they're going to be
Yeah.
alchemically remade into something that we might not like at all and can do nothing to stop. What's it all for then? What are we doing here?
Yeah, but I mean, those nation states that you've just mentioned are recent inventions as well. I mean, Italy was not a nation until very recently.
Oh, sure,
Um,
and I'm totally fine with abolishing the Italian nation state if that's,
yeah, good.
you know,
Well, I mean, you
but I
might
mean
go,
the
what?
people though, like if we're going to
Yeah,
be,
yeah,
if we're going to be mixed into something new by this alchemic
mm,
reaction of mass immigration and combining all the peoples,
yeah,
and because I think the objective of that is to basically turn the world into a Coca-Cola commercial. And then obviously it's beneficial to the business class, and we've talked about how it's beneficial to
yeah,
religious institutions. But at the end of the day, we are meddling with the biological reality of genuine diversity of human peoples that once
yeah.
they're gone or once they're transformed to a certain
Mm.
extent, they don't come back.
I don't think that's going to work long term. And there are still nations that are predominantly, like China and Japan, for instance, don't have a lot of multiculturalism. Um, I think places like America will just become divided, and maybe Europe will fragment into city states. It might go back to city states, and where culture and customs can be more easily managed, because if it's a smaller area and lesser people, it's easily managed that way. So we might go back to that kind of scenario, so city states, and then you can sort of say, you don't belong here, get out, and people might just leave on their own accord. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So um,
I've seen some others.
yeah,
Mike at Imperium Press, Mike Maxwell, has that belief as well. That we're actually um, hurtling faster than people perceive to a very tribalistic and
yeah,
localistic world. And I think the scale is evenly balanced and it could tip either way. Because I think with mass media communications, with 5G, Wi-Fi, and with these now, like we were talking about earlier, these globally extended networks that don't have any country allegiance, ethnic allegiance, um, and they have uh, headquarters based all over the planet. It could easily tip to a sort of sci-fi dystopian one world, massive imperium rather than the city state and tribalistic future that some have in mind. Uh,
yeah. I don't see that working though, because we are tribal by nature, and they've found, even in countries like where like America, for instance, Australia, Canada, when you got immigrants moving in, they all seem to move into the same
yeah.
areas, and they so
Well,
and
that's the
that
thing. If it was left to
usually
human nature,
does
I don't think a
happen.
lot of this would be happening to begin with. But the people who are pulling these strings and making these decisions, I don't think they're very interested in human nature. I think that many of them despise human nature. For example, Yuval Noah Harari, right?
Yeah,
I think you know the name. I think he despises humans, especially the
he's
ones that aren't of his tribe.
yeah. See, I mean, see, that's the other thing I've noticed. If they say that Jews have been able to keep their distinct culture and race intact for thousands of years, mind you, they say thousands of years.
Yeah.
I've got another belief on
Hmm.
that. I'll take for thousands of years while not having their own nation, right? So if they're able to do that, then everyone can, any nation can do, any race can do that. You
Hmm.
see, what's stopping Italians from doing that? If they can do it, and they've successfully done it for thousands of years, you know,
Hmm. Well, that's
you
why
can have.
I'm a big believer, and this is why I really hate it when these e-crusaders, these performatively overzealous Christians, shit on our pre-Christian European ancestors, um, whose traditions and practices we still maintain in various ways. And in other parts of Europe, they're almost completely the same. Like if you go to Estonia, Lithuania, some of these Baltic states,
Mhm.
it's they're still having pagan wedding ceremonies that look exactly the
Yeah.
same as they did before the Teutonic Knights went in there and killed everyone and forcibly converted them. Um,
Well,
but
Italy has Befana. I mean, I think that's pagan, isn't it?
I'm sorry.
Italy they celebrate La
Ah, La
Befana.
Befana. Yeah, I mean, well, these are like exactly the folklore as
Yeah,
well plays a part in this,
yeah.
and that's why and I go back to I always think of the popes who and also obviously Renaissance era Italy, the popes and the artists who were inspired by pre-Christian Europe, the European peoples, Greco-Roman world, to create
Mm,
these great works of art. You had
mm.
popes who re-erected Egyptian obelisks that had been brought
Yes,
to Rome by the old emperors.
yes,
If it was up to the e-crusaders of today, all these works of art, the Bernini statues of Greco-Roman gods and goddesses would be demolished, and the obelisks would be torn down. It was Christians who put them up. you know um,
Certain Christians, though,
the
predominantly,
ones that understand the inner
yes,
teachings.
are
Yeah.
predominantly Catholic. I mean, that whole, take down all those monuments and that mentality, burn it to the ground, was really, came out of the Protestant Reformation
Hmm.
and Puritans and that's why they were mostly kicked out of Europe because we
Yeah.
didn't want them here
Yeah.
because they were nuts,
Exactly.
and they all went to America and created
Mhm.
that beautiful nation, with that mindset.
But this is what I mean to say is that it is important, and I've been trying to practice this as much as I can in my own personal life to maintain these old ways, because I do
Yeah.
think that we are going to go deeper and deeper into identity crises. Like you were saying earlier, even people are going to be in conflict with themselves and who are they, and
Yes.
I think that it's important to have some sort of anchor, some sort of roots. And so even though it was difficult to learn some things about Christianity, when I was starting to learn these things years ago, I consider myself fortunate to have gone through this, because I've rediscovered a world that always attracted me. I've always been inspired, like all decent men should be, by ancient Rome and ancient Greece and the
Mhm.
Iliad and all these things.
Yeah.
But I'm enjoying a new appreciation for all of it like never before. Because if everything is going to fall away, and if we've been betrayed by institutions that were meant to have protected us, and we're going to be hurtling towards conflict, these old stories, the folklore, the music, the customs, and yes, even the old gods are going to matter a lot more for all of us.
Yeah, they'll be retained, though. They always have. The core truth has not been lost. It's like I said, they've just rebranded, and that's maybe what's going to happen, you know, with our culture and customs. Some things will be retained, some things will not.
Hmm.
Um, it's up to us to retain the things of value and keep them alive within this transitional period.
Yeah.
So when we come out of it, those things that we hold dear make it through. That's how I see it, anyway.
I agree. So I feel like we're coming to a nice conclusion to this.
Mm.
What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
Okay, so I'll
been
give
a
it
long.
to you to just tell us a little bit more about where people can find your work. I know on your Substack you pretty much have everything, as well as the on-air episodes you do. But I think those are also on YouTube. So just tell people where they can find you and enjoy more of your perspectives, which I think are really interesting.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I'm on X, but I get very little traction here. I don't know. I'm doing something wrong, I think. The algorithm doesn't like me anyway. So most of my all my work's on my Substack, uh, which is Substack at Phoenicianhunter.com. And I also have a YouTube channel, which, I don't do regular videos, but I do have a podcast channel where I, record a podcast every probably fortnight. So I've got maybe 30, I think 36 podcasts currently. So if anyone's interested, they're all free to listen to. Some of my articles are behind a paywall. I just trying to earn a living, I guess, out of it.
Yeah.
Uh, and anyone who subscribes to my Substack gets a free copy of a digital copy of my book as well. So there's a little incentive there. Yeah. So if you're interested in knowing about, Christianity and all the religions, basically, but something we didn't talk about is what I write about mostly is the merchant class, and this
Hmm.
merchant class that has, I think, managed, like I said, humanity since antiquity,
Yeah.
and moved through the empires, the city of London. I'll talk about them quite a lot. So if that interests anyone,
Well, I mean,
that's
if you want, next time we can do one of these again, and we can talk about that, because I think there's a riddle in your username as well. It's
yeah.
not just Phoenicians. It's a slightly different pronunciation, and you
Well,
learn more things about these people.
yeah, yeah. Phoenicians, did not call themselves Phoenicians; they called themselves Canaanites.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
and in the Bible, Canaanites means merchants
Hmm.
or bankers. So that's why I'm Phoenician hunter. So I'm
Yeah.
hunting merchants and bankers. Yeah, and then they took the mask of Judaism.
Hmm.
Um, and what we need to know is that these aren't the people of God. They,
Hmm.
Jews were all converts from Semite countries. They're
Hmm.
mostly converts from Phoenician cities. So, yeah, but that's another. We could do another 2 hours on that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
thanks
Wrap it
for
up there.
coming on. It was really nice talking to you, and I hope that the listeners enjoyed this, and I hope it offered lots of food for thought,
Yeah.
and also even some practical advice. Even I think so. Again, thanks for
Yeah.
coming on, and it was great talking to you.
Thanks for hosting it, and yeah, hope to do one again soon. Thank you.
Likewise. All right, everyone. Take care. Good night.